Okay, so today we are going to talk about lighting, which I've also been studying up on to improve my renders. So let's get started. Um, First of all, let's talk about some of the basic techniques, and we're going to start with HDRI. It's not generally recommended to only use HDRI, but you can certainly use them in various ways. You can use it as a base lighting. In this case, I have two HDRIs. You can have as many as you want. This one here is the backdrop. And this one down here is the lighting of the subject. So if I change this, you can see he'll get dark. And if I go to this one and I change the power, I can make the background really. So that is your basic your HRs. Now this is important. There are a couple of important things to know. First of all, let's look at the back plane here. There is now the way you get this is called the visible environment. You can tick the back plane. You can also do reflections and refractions. The light part is under the primary environment, but I want to take a look at the back plane. If you click this, you'll get an actual node graph here that looks very much like the texturing ones. And you notice this is in an image texture. Now, because I put it in a color corrector and I did all this, you can't use these rotations in this case, in the rotations here as you normally would. You'd have to use them here. Now, the other important thing about this is notice the texture is in where it says image texture. Okay. So that is where you need it to be. So if you're putting it in, let's say you get your environment, and when you bring in a new environment, let me show you with this one. It'll say image texture. You want to click here. Whoop. Oh, let me bring another one in as an example. I think that'll make it easier. So we go here to do it. We go to Octane, well, in the Octane dialog, we go to Objects, and we go to HDRI Environment, and you see it says Image Texture. Click here, and if you go to Shader, you see where it says File? This is where you would put the image that you want to use, if you're going to use an image. Otherwise, it'll just give you a black background. Let me get rid of this because we don't need it. But you can see with the Grayscale Gorilla, you take where it says File. So you open this up, you go to Shader, and where it says File, you grab this into here. And that'll pick up the HRI you selected. So again, now what I did here is I put in a color corrector, and like I said, therefore you have to use this transform rather than the transform at the top level. So that is your HDRIs. Another way you can do it is using lights. So here I have the HRIs turned off. I have lights. Let me make this bigger and show you where they are. And then there we go. So let me do this. So see, now this should be more this way, but there's no cut and dry. Well, if you're doing the traditional 3-point lighting, this would be more at a 45-degree angle here. But we have a light behind, which is more of a rim light. We have a key light, and we which again is probably not rotated exactly the right direction. And we have a fill light, which is generally very, very low. But again, you know, you use the lights the way you need to. So you have these three lights, and one of the things they also mention is you want to get from dark to bright. Now this is probably a little too bright, but you can see how we're aligned. You can see where the rim light's catching the edges. We're getting a little bit of light here, and the key light's providing most of the light kind of from the side. So that is using lights, no HDRI. This would, you know, this is, you know, you want something dramatic. And that's where you would use this type of lighting. Now, you can, of course, combine the two. You know, you have a background, let's say, that you want, or you want to use one of their studio type backgrounds that gives a little bit of color, but you want to use your lighting setup. You can do something like this. Do it if you can rotate. You see how I can rotate X and get, maybe I want a yellow background, more of a yellow light. I can do it that way. So, and again, you can change the brightness. You can, this is invisible environment because you're just using it as a backplate. And of course, you have your image texture. One way to make sure it's in the right place is when you click this button, you will see an image texture. It'll try to put it in, I forget what they call it, just some kind of regular, like a BMP, you know, a bitmap type thing. If you put it up in the wrong, if you put it in here rather than down in here next to file. So that is combining the two. Now let's talk a little bit about HiKey and low-key. Low-key is probably closer to what we've seen. It's either dramatic lighting, like if you're watching a film noir or something like this, or you're having drama where, you know, there's lights and shadows, and you're using that to create a mood. Well, that works, that's used all the time in movies where there's a drama, but in comedies it tends to be something light, something comedic. You want bright, everything bright, well lit. Plus, in a lot of these, you know, you'll have actors moving around the set, and you want to make sure they're always lit. In the early 1950s, in the classic TV series I Love Lucy, they came up with the three camera technique, and that was based on HiKey type of lighting. So let me show you this picture. This is a classic example. A number of the references will bring in, show pictures from the behind the scenes from this show. So this was probably done. This was done over 70 years ago, and some people give the credit to Desi Arnaz, who I'm pointing to, the fellow wearing the sweater vest, and some people give credit to more of the production people. I think they probably collaborated. Regardless, notice here, this is the important point for our purposes, these lights, all these lights here. Notice how many lights they have to make this bright and cheery, this bright set. So wherever these characters move in this living room set, they will be appropriately lit, and you're not going to have any of the actors in shadow, which for this type of story, this type of production, that is appropriate. And for animation, very often that's what you want, because you're doing something bright. You're doing, you know, you're not trying to get great drama. Sometimes you are, but in many cases you're not. So you want a lot of lights. You may want a lot of lights. Let me show you that example. So I can show you. Notice how many lights I have here. I have lights all over the place. And I notice all the balls are in well lit. And let me show you here. This was a little thing. It's not a great animation, but the point was to demonstrate how wherever the balls are in this animation, notice that they're brightly lit. That was the whole point of this. And you can see that. So that was more of a HiKey lighting where I'm trying to get everything lit and trying to do a light type of thing. So let's see. I want to make sure we cover the Octane settings because this is very important. By default, this is quite high. It's like 1 million or some ridiculous number. This 1,000, 2,000 is generally good enough to get you what you want. You can always raise it if it's not. GI clamp is another thing. Way too high generally. Very large number. We bring it down to between 1 and 10 is generally what's recommended. What kernel you use. Generally, path tracing is considered better than direct lighting. And if you're using a lot of glass or something where you're going to have caustics, caustics are where the light can be refracted all over the place, like if it goes through a glass type of thing, then you would want to use, and actually I did in the other example, you want to use photon tracing because, let me show you that in the other example. Where did we go? Here we are. So let's look at the settings on here. So this is using photon tracing. You can increase this gathering radius, and there's a great video by Silverwings who I've mentioned where he goes through this in great detail. And this will allow them, the idea is generally when you're rendering in these programs, the camera sends out photons, and they find their way back to the light source, which is kind of the opposite of the way it works in the real world. And that doesn't work so good when it's going through glass because when the photon goes through glass, it will refract and it's not going to find the light. So you get noise and it doesn't look good. The photon tracing, the light will send out photons as well and they'll kind of meet. And so in this case, the photons that are sent out will kind of look for the photons sent out from the camera will kind of look at the photons sent out from the light and kind of meet up. And this by increasing this, it'll look around some more to try to find the photons and give it a bigger radius of search. So that is important if you're doing things with glass. And the glass here is these little balls. Now they look red because they're behind a red background, but these are in fact glass. So that is something that you should be aware of if you're going to be using glass. This is another thing I wanted to briefly mention. You can set it up so that when you render it, you get no background. So in this case, I have the primary light source, primary environment as my light. I have no background. Now it's important here, what you want to do for your settings in this case is you want to turn on the alpha channel and turn off keep environment. Also, from what I've seen, if you do an AOVs, that is going to, you may get those in the mix. But what's going to happen is, so when you bring it in, I'm using a plugin called Exr-IO, and that'll separate it out for you. Okay, so I'm going to bring in Rhino A, and notice this plugin comes up. And when I come up, so there are my channels, and you can bring channels in to you as layers, but look at my layers. I have this whole RGB plus alpha, and I can put any kind of background behind it. And in fact, if you look at this one, which I did a little earlier, I put some effects on to make it kind of match. The other thing I did here is I used the clone tool to kind of cover up the edge. That's one thing you have to be careful with when you're doing something like that, is you are going to have, it's not necessarily going to look right together, so you're going to have some work in terms of adjusting things to make it look how it is you wish it to look. Now this is a single shot. Obviously, you would do a similar thing if you were bringing this into, you had a video of CG and then a background. You may have to do the same thing. Okay, the last thing I want to cover is volumetric lighting. I turned off I have the lights, but I added the spotlight. Now notice you get the little, volume, just like as a spotlight you'd see when at a show. And in this case, this light is one of their newer lights. And what's important to be aware of here is generally you turn off camera visibility if you're using an area light. So otherwise you'll see it in the image and it won't look good. You may even see some of the parameters. That happened to me, my final project on Ascend. But you need to leave it on here, because if you turn it off, no volume. You still get the light on the subject, but you don't get this volumetric spotlight. You can adjust the density of the light, make it more or less dense. You can even, and where did I do that? Here, I gave it a little bit of a color. So that is something, again, you'd want to, if you want to get a particular effect where you're focusing on a particular subject, that's where the spotlight might come in. And of course, like anything, you can animate it, or my guess is you can also make this targeted. I don't know, like any of the lights, you can have targeted lights, and I'm just trying to find, in order to make light targeted, you would do something like this. And you would use something, the animation tags. So anyway, here is this kind of gets you started with the basics. I would look at some of the other references I'm going to provide in the description, because I think they will be very useful. In particular, there's a documentation for Octane on the lights. There is a playlist of a whole lighting series that someone did. I mean, like 6 or 7 videos going through a whole bunch of stuff. That's really good. The references from last week are also very valuable, because they talk about lighting, texturing, they kind of go together. speeding up renders. I have a link to that video. Excellent video. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I will speak to you next time. Take care.